Welcome, everyone, to another session of TriTech University. My name is Bill Steppen, and today we are going to be taking a look at the QuickBooks interface that is available with the General Ledger module of the AIM-SI or AIM system. We're going to be taking a look at why you might want to use it, how it gets set up, and how to make use of it. So we'll kind of explore all the different nooks and crannies of this interface and just basically make sure that everyone who's attending today comes away with a better understanding of how this works. AIM has always been and will continue to be a fully available accounting solution for those of you who want to keep everything in-house with the program. But for those of you who prefer to use QuickBooks for any number of reasons, this webinar is going to be for you. As always, most recently we have been using GoToWebinar, and if you've never attended one of these webinars live before, there is going to be a control panel on the side of the screen that you'll be able to use to interact with me. There's going to be a questions box in that control panel. If you have any questions throughout the course of this webinar, feel free to type them into that questions box. I am monitoring that on my screen, and I will go ahead and answer those as I see them come in. That being said, if that panel is taking up too much space on the screen and you'd like to get it out of the way, there's going to be a little button there. It looks like a little orange button with a white arrow on it is what it should look like by default. And that should shrink that out of the way and make it so that you can see the fullness of my screen. So with that being said, let's go ahead and jump into it. So you should be seeing my AIM screen. I've been using this music database for the majority of my webinars lately. So if you are not in the music industry, please don't worry too much about the background images or the category descriptions or anything like that you'll be seeing throughout this webinar. The concept is unchanging from one vertical to another. It's just different backgrounds and such. So when it comes to the QuickBooks part of the software, it's important to know that this is directly fed off of the general ledger chart of accounts that you have in your system. If we go into maintenance and into ledger, we will find the chart of accounts here. By the way, I've been doing my best to use these on-screen menus. If your menus don't look exactly the way that mine do, you can always use the drop downs to always get directly to where I'm going as well. When it comes to the chart of accounts, basically the idea here is that every ledger account in your system can track a corresponding balance. And for those of you who have some accounting background, basically all of these accounts fit somewhere in the range of generally accepted principles. So these 100 accounts, for example, are asset accounts. Down into your 200s, we get into some basic liability accounts, and your 400s and 500s are revenue accounts respectively, with the 400s being inventory, the 500s being everything else. Your 600s are expenses, and that's kind of the general format. Now, you may notice that over here, along with the name of the ledger account, there is a QuickBooks field. The idea with this is that if you would like to take the ledger activity that impacts this ledger account and have that be available to export out into QuickBooks, what you would want to do is you would want to put the name of the corresponding QuickBooks account into this field. Now that's kind of the gist of it. It's just a matter of going through and mapping out these ledger accounts where applicable. So for example, anything that we want heading in our their checking account number 1 here, for example, if we want that to take that ledger activity and apply it to the corresponding ledger account in QuickBooks for your checking account there, you would sit over here and you would give it the exact name of that particular account. Maybe it's First Trust and Savings Bank or something like that. Basically, you just take that exact name and you plug it into that field and you hit save. Now, something to bear in mind as you're kind of going through and setting up these mappings is that that is going to show up on the standard report that we have for your chart of accounts. So just to show you what I mean by that, if we go into the report menu and into the general ledger menu and take a look at the chart of accounts report here, and I'm just going to go ahead and throw this report up to the screen for us all to be able to browse here. Let me go ahead and pull that up here and we'll show it on screen. So what you're going to see on this report is it's going to show you basically a listing of all of your chart of accounts, their descriptions, whether or not they have departments set up for them if applicable, and last but not least, there is going to be a corresponding QuickBooks account column there. So you can see how they've got the number, the description, the type, the subtype and grouping, the department, and the QuickBooks account. And we're focusing on the QuickBooks account in today's session. So the idea with this is you can print this out and maybe go down the list and say, okay, yes, I think this should have a QuickBooks account associated with it. Fill it in, and then the next time you print this out, that name will show up there. Or if you've needing to use this for any other reason, and basically it's a great way of just kind of seeing an overview of how your chart is set up. So that's the idea with that. Now, the main thing with this setup is that when it's all said and done, going through back into that area and going through to the chart of accounts, you're going to want to make sure that the accounts that you map to QuickBooks ultimately are going to have in-balance entries when they come into QuickBooks. So you might notice that I had mapped, for example, my checking account number 1. I would also then want to make sure that any activity that I might be paying out of my checking account also has a corresponding mapping to QuickBooks. So if I go down, for example, to my 600s, if I'm making expense payments out of the software and I'm exporting those out to QuickBooks, I may want to come down here and find those corresponding accounts. For example, wages, maybe that has a ledger listing on the QuickBooks side of employee wages or something to that effect. I should stress that I'm not going to be able to show this whole thing full circle and show how this gets pulled into QuickBooks, as I do not have a copy of QuickBooks on my computer. My recommendation would be to work with your bookkeeper or your accountant or someone who's kind of requesting or requiring these QuickBooks makeups so that you can make sure that you're getting the exact names of these QuickBooks accounts for plugging into these fields. Now, depending on the reason why you're doing this QuickBooks mapping, that can have an impact on how much work you need to do for this QuickBooks setup. For example, if your intention is not to use the AIM software for tracking the deposits made into your checking account at the end of the day, or the payments coming out of your checking account, and your sole focus is to simply pull in the numbers of sales and other types of activity into QuickBooks so that you can then turn around and run your financials in there, you may not need to map as many of these fields, as many of these accounts as one might need to if they were doing this for some other reason. Some other reason might be you do want to take full advantage of the accounting program in AIM, but your bookkeeper, your outside bookkeeper or CPA, is requesting any and all ledger activity to be in a QuickBooks format, in which case you pretty much need to go through here and map practically every ledger account that has activity to it. So just some things to kind of keep in mind with that. For what it's worth, I will go through and I will map just a couple of accounts here. So for example, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to map my 109-1 cash clearing, you might have a QuickBooks account in your QuickBooks known as undeposited assets or something along those lines. And for what it's worth, you may actually wind up using that same QuickBooks account in multiple listings. So you may not only use it for your cash clearing, you may use it for your check clearing as well. Undeposited assets. That's easy for me to say, but not for me to type. So this is kind of the idea of doing these mappings overall. Now, one other thing I will do here is I will go through and I will see if I can't map a couple of extra ones here. For example, I'm going to go down to my inventory accounts and I'm going to go to my band and orchestra accessories, and I might say this is inventory on hand. I might then also go down to my 400s, and for that same category, find the corresponding cost, and I might say this is going to be cost of goods sold. And then I might go once again to the listing up here for the sales, find that listing here for the sales band and orchestra, and I might call this sold inventory. Just something along those lines. Jack is asking, is this mapping to QuickBooks only available on the latest version of AIM? No, Jack. Actually, this has been around for quite a number of versions now, back into the Visual Fox Pro days. I want to say this is going back to, say, maybe version at least 9 or 8, if not 7. It's been around for some time, and the process is exactly the same. You would just need to go in and go into the chart, and there will be a QuickBooks field in there. Now, on prior versions, or 11 and older, you may need to request a QuickBooks program code. We would activate that for you as long as you've purchased the accounts payable and general ledger modules. So if you are on an older version currently, Jack, and you're not seeing these fields, then that might be something to consider. There is just making sure you've got that module, and if you do, just give us a call and we can get you the code to unlock those fields. So another one that you'll probably need, and I'm just going to going through and thinking of all the accounts that get hit when, let's say, a sale occurs. So I'll definitely want to make sure that I've got my sales tax account mapped. And I believe that will be enough for me to kind of get going here. So basically, this is probably the most critical part of this process, is going through, finding the different accounts that you need to make sure are mapped, and that will be bringing over balanced entries, both the credits and the debits of all of your reference activity, so that when it's time for you to be able to pull that over into QuickBooks, you will go into the modules menu. So we'll go into modules. We're going to go into ledger. We're going to go into utilities. And in here, you'll find a QuickBooks export utility. And this will be at the same spot as it is in older versions as well for you, Jack. Excuse me. On the QuickBooks export routine, you have two ways of doing this. You can either do this by a particular reference number, or you can do this for a date range. Now, again, this may, depending on what your intention is of using this QuickBooks export, this may impact how often you want to do this export and the reasons why you'd want to do it. If your intention is to use QuickBooks for your day-to-day accounting, you may be coming in here on a daily basis and just doing the date range of today through today to get all that activity. However, if you're going to be doing your accounting and bookkeeping in AIM and then just exporting this on occasion for the benefit of your CPA, you may come in and do this once a month or once a quarter or maybe even once a year, depending on how often you send that type of ledger data to them. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to run this for a 1 week period. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and click the refresh button here. And this will find any accounts that I have mapped up here. Now, the big thing here is that you'll notice this is coming up with an amount that is not equal to 0. So something in here is coming up and throwing everything off balance. And probably the big thing here is going to be that I did map my checking account. So I don't have all the other different things that checking account is balancing out against, such as the deposits and the check expenses. And you'll notice that's even coming up in red right there. Basically, anything that's coming up in red is basically going to come up and kind of consider itself out of balance. So for example, you can see I've got reference 1014 here. If I'm looking at just the activity for reference 1014, you can see how, if my math is correct, this is all coming up in balance. We've got the 348 and the $1.85 there in the as far as the debit amounts. Let me just go ahead and grab my calculator here. So we'll pull up the calculator and just do some quick math on this. So 348 plus 185 less 185 less 23 cents and less 325 comes out to 0. So you can see how that's balancing itself out accordingly. Now, where these other accounts are coming up that are not in balance by reference, that's basically these ones in red. So if I wanted to make sure that these are going to go into QuickBooks appropriately, I may want to go back and run a list ledger by reference for these corresponding reference numbers, 5003 and 1022, 1023, 1025, etc. Basically, I'd want to make sure that those accounts that are being referenced in those ledger activities have a QuickBooks link to them. So once you've kind of done all that and then you're ready to create your QuickBooks file, you would come down here to the bottom half. You would click down the little button here for creating the file B. So for example, on the desktop here, and I would do QuickBooks export, and I'd go ahead and save that. And this is going to generate an Intuit interface file, an IIF file. And the idea with that is that that is something that QuickBooks can then import in and add to that ledger activity. It should be really stressed that this is solely for the ledger activity as far as this QuickBooks export goes. This is not going to export other details apart from ledger. It's not going to export customer names or sales invoice figures or inventory on those sales invoices or anything like that. It's solely exporting the ledger activity. So the ledger number, the date of that activity, whether it was a debit or a credit, all of those little details that are solely a ledger function. Out of curiosity, let me go ahead and see if I can get this to do just reference 1014 here, and if not, I can always come up and do this. So let's actually just do that. Let's just go ahead and hit refresh on that so that way we can see that the total selected amount is going to be 0. Let's then go ahead and click that create file, and that will have gone ahead. And if I go to my desktop here, and let me go ahead and of course switch this so that we're seeing the whole screen, we should now see down here, and it will be hard to see white on white, but it now has that QuickBooks export.iif file. And of course, with QuickBooks installed on your computer, if it is, that should have the appropriate icon that goes along with it. Now, of course, like I said, I don't have QuickBooks on my system, so I'm not going to be able to open that up or do anything with that. But the idea with that would then be that you could double click on that and pull that in, or more than likely you go into QuickBooks and there'd probably be a menu option for importing an IIF file, and then you point it to that file. So that's really the idea with that whole routine. So just a few other things to kind of consider when looking at the setup of it. So again, back in the maintenance and ledger and chart of accounts, just again, making sure that you're going through and mapping out every single account that would need to have a mapping. And then one other thing here with this QuickBooks export, just a few things that I kind of glossed over. For example, you may have noticed that I just did this both for a date range and with just a reference. If we did it for just the reference, in other words, if we clear out these date fields, you don't have to have that date up there. Now, notice how when I put that in, sans the date range, nothing showed up, but I could check mark to include already sent. The idea with this is that if you're doing this on a regular basis, and you could potentially be doing this for overlapping date ranges, when we export these out to QuickBooks, we also, on the programming side of things in the background, we are flagging whether or not that ledger activity, that ledger detail, has already been exported at some point to QuickBooks. If anything, QuickBooks is really particular about importing in already processed ledger activity. It's basically just going to go ahead and duplicate it if that were the case. So by default, we don't normally export those that have been previously sent or otherwise exported out of AIM and into a QuickBooks file. I can override that by check marking that, and that way it would pull up those previously established or exported ledger records, just like we saw here, and then I could go ahead and create a new file with those. Typically, the reason why you might do that from an outside looking in perspective might be, let's say that you had to do a reinstall of QuickBooks on your computer, and you have all these prior exports. You didn't want to necessarily do them one by one by one. You just want to go out and you want to grab a new export of all of this past activity. Or maybe another reason, maybe you don't have those ledger exports and you want to go ahead and recreate them, but you don't want to do them from another original perspective of one by one by one. You want to go ahead and grab that whole date range. Or maybe it's someone else's QuickBooks system. Again, maybe you have your own local QuickBooks system, your CPA has their own, and you want to have all of that activity in one nice, neat file as opposed to emailing him or her, 20 or 30 different files over the course of a quarter or a semester or whatever it might be. But that is essentially the whole idea here with the QuickBooks export. So once you have that in mind, it's just basically those two functions, the QuickBooks export, and then, or rather vice versa, setting up the QuickBooks in your chart of accounts, and then from there going and doing the export. So hopefully that makes sense. Let me know if you have any questions on this whole process. Looking ahead to the upcoming webinar schedule, I do have a webinar coming up this Thursday all about vendor tips and tricks. So if you are looking to get the most out of how you're tracking your vendors, the different ways in which you can add extra info to them, definitely stay tuned for that one. Next week, I'll be looking at some delayed delivery tactics, why you might use that mode at point of sale and what it's best used for, and how to take advantage of that. And then also next week, I will be doing a webinar all about accounts payable discounts, what they are and how to key those in and how to make sure you're not losing out on what I've basically kind of call free money. So as long as you pay it early, then you can take advantage of that discount. That's the whole idea of that. So if you haven't registered for those, definitely do so. If there are any other webinars that interest you, definitely let me know. You can drop me an email at training@tritechretail.com. And I take all webinar suggestions very seriously. Even if I've done that webinar in the past, it might have been some time since I've gone over that function, and maybe we've added some new features and benefits to it. So I'm always willing to explore webinars that I've already done just from an updated perspective. All of the webinars that I have done are available for you to browse as part of your maintenance package. So you can check those out in the member portal. Simply go to the download page and there will be a link at the top of the screen that says for the latest V12 webinars, click here, and that will take you to all the recordings that I have done. So let's check in on some of the questions that have been come in. Joe Ellen asks, we will need an additional program to do the QuickBooks export, or will we need an additional program to do the QuickBooks export, i.e. Transaction Pro, to get the data into QuickBooks, or does AIM already provide that ability? I'm not sure what you mean by this Transaction Pro, Joe Ellen. From what I understand, and again, I've never actually done this QuickBooks import myself, but basically just by the nature of generating this QuickBooks export IIF file, whatever you want it to be called, you should be able to go into QuickBooks and import that in. Just point it right to that file, and it should go ahead and pull in that ledger activity. So I don't think there's really any other utility needed, third party or otherwise, as far as a go-between in there. So thank you so much for that. Hopefully that makes sense. Jack asks, I went into a chat requesting what I would need for AIM 10 to get the QB code. Chat is not working. Can someone send me what I need to install the QB code? Definitely, Jack. Once I'm off the call here, I will check in with what is needed to email that over to you. So be on the lookout in an email for a code that you can key into your system. Joe Ellen says, okay, thank you. So hopefully that made sense then. Let's see. I'm not seeing any other questions coming in at this time. I think we're going to go ahead and call the webinar for today. So if you think of a question that relates to QuickBooks and you didn't get a chance to ask it here, feel free to email it directly to me again at that training@tritechretail.com. As always, we have a number of support agents ready and waiting by the phones to take your calls. If you do have any questions outside of this, or if you are having any issues with the program for whatever reason, give us a call. Communication is key, and we want to make sure that we're helping out wherever we can so that you can focus on servicing your customers just the same as we are servicing you. Thank you so much for your attendance and your continued support of TriTech and its products so that we can turn around and provide the best service possible to you. And we will see you at the next session. Take care.